Evening, everyone. It's Tuesday, May 11th. It's the Curriculum and Ed Planning Committee coming to you live. Let the record show that members Rodriguez and Bondo are present, as are myself, and we're joined by Barrett Wilkinson and led by Malia Nally. I'll turn it over to now.
Great. So, hi, everybody. Great to see you. Very excited about our agenda this evening. Maybe we'll start with the meeting minutes, Adam. The logistics, and then I'll tee up the two policies. Does that sound okay?
All right. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of April 14th's meeting? So moved by member Rodriguez, seconded by member Bondo. Any questions? Any public comment? Any board comment?
No.
All right. So all those in favor of approving the minutes, please indicate. And that's unanimous.
Awesome. Thank you. As we teed up last month, we have two policies we're going to review this evening. Our goal is to hopefully make whatever revisions we want and then vote to pass them up for first read to the full board. So ambitious agenda. First policy is IKF, which is our graduation policy. My assumption is that this will be short because it's just technical changes for the time being. I'm going to manage our time where if we take more than 10 minutes, I might pause us and come back to it next meeting in order to get to the equity policy work. I just really think it's important we get that one moving as well. But I think we should be fine. And Adam, we can kind of work together to see what makes sense depending on what comes up. Okay, so in terms of the policy, you should have a version that has both, at least mine, the way I see it, has green and red lines, just so that you can see transparently what changes were made. Are you all looking at that? Or do you want me to share my screen? I might share my screen just to be useful. I know we have at least one attendee here, just in case. So just as a reminder, and I did the little preview and update last month, we had been updating our graduation policy annually as we were kind of doing a cascading of, with each graduating class, we were rolling off the traditional credit system and rolling into the proficiency-based expectations. And so this is something we've just been doing annually. As I was looking into this, it seems that what we have as our actual policy that's in board docs is not in sync with that cycle. And unfortunately, I don't know what happened in terms of things getting posted. But I do know that I think last spring we did not meet because of the pandemic, so did not do our normal cycle. So basically, the substantive changes were those that were discussed several years ago as they pertain to our proficiency-based requirements. So what you see here at the top are just essentially me deleting, just like I've done each year for the past few years, that kind of final graduating class that is now going to be graduated, and removing all the sort of older credit-based expectations. This piece is in red because in the revision we made 2 years ago, I was trying to show you guys the red line from that. This was removed. This really gets added down below and is not substantive. It's just about streamlining. And then we move into this is just now no longer the front piece about credits. And this goes straight into the language of the proficiency-based diploma requirements we have in Portland. A couple things to call your attention to that we talked about a couple years ago when we made these red lines. When the state changed their requirement of a proficiency-based diploma, we shifted from according to Maine law just to Portland Public Schools system of learning. So that's the rationale for what you see there. This is just kind of streamlining language. Down here, I think, is the only substantive thing to point out. We are looking at 21 units of proficiency. So there's two things to just be transparent with you all about. The first is the 21 units. This year we had still had the 41 credits, I think it is. And we worked with the data team, and it seems like there's just some complexity in the system in terms of converting credits and ups and things like that. So we're just for this year going with status quo of what's in IC to not create like a huge burden of change and confusion for families and teachers. But the policy, the spirit of the policy here still stands. The other thing to just note is that we think of these as units of proficiency, but in IC, the language says credit. And it's like some issue with IC, our student information system, where you literally can't change it. And so it will say credits on students' transcripts. But what we mean is a unit of proficiency, because that's what a credit should be, a unit of proficiency in so much as it represents students have mastered the standard, which is why we just chose to leave the language like this in the policy. But I just wanted to say that in case people saw some inconsistency or incongruence. The other thing is we talked about this at the time. Our initial expectation in competency-based learning system was that students need to meet the standard. We, in our change process, weren't in a position, and I don't think we're all the way there yet, to sort of require that in that language. So what we talk about is that you have to pass the standard, and that gets into the nitty gritty of our grading system, which you might be interested in picking up. I would suggest we don't go there tonight, but do potentially go there in the future. And I'd love to have some other folks from our high school teams present for that conversation. But just naming why that was there. And then we just changed our language, extended learning opportunity. One thing also substantively to name is that we don't have world language in here. We haven't, so that's not new, but this is something that's been bubbling up and something we might want to take into consideration as something we'd like to require in the future. It's just, I've heard feedback about that. But again, we were not trying to do anything substantive with the policy at this point in time for all the reasons that I think folks understand. And then this just goes on to describe the extended learning opportunities that students could access as ways to get ups or credits. And this is just the same, all the same stuff. And this piece is crossed out because it's overlaps with this section up here. And again, this was already discussed and approved by the committee 2 years ago, but just showing you the redlining there. So that's it. So again, all that I did tonight that hasn't been discussed more deeply by a curriculum committee is what's up here, which is just to remove this final roll off of the folks that had the old diploma requirements. So it's really just updating it to be current. That's it.
Malia, as we're intending to vote on this, it just helps my brain if we treat it like a motion. Is that okay by you? So basically, is there a motion by the committee to recommend policy IKF to the full board? Would be the first step, right? Mm-hmm. And then, so moved by Member Rodriguez. Moved. Yeah. There was a second by Member Bondo. And then we'll just go through any questions.
Perfect.
Okay. So first off, any questions from the committee?
Yes, I have a quick question. So, I mean, everything's going to be a little more clear because we have a red, we have a different color. So the final version of that, because I remember we voted on that 2 years ago because I was on the committee. And then, and I think when we're going to go for the first reading with the full board, everything will be clear, right? So that means we're going to have all the clear language being seen. That's why I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I'll provide one that doesn't show all the redlining, and then one that does. Usually the feedback from the board is they want to see the redlining. So I figured in committee it would be worth having that transparent to you all. But yeah, when we upload it for first read, we'll have this one plus the actual clean version.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
And just one question on when you mentioned the report, I think you said the report card still says credits. Is that explanation that you gave us also going to be in the policy, or is that you just gave that as a side note? That's not going to be documented anywhere, is it?
I gave it as a side note because it's really just like Yeah, I don't know that it should go into a whole policy. I do think next year, now that we have our data team kind of in seat with Gavin's leadership, I think he's very interested in some of these systems issues. So I think when we have the bandwidth to look at that, if we really think it has to be credit and we want to change the language here, we could just do some revisions to this policy to reflect that. But for now, I don't want to change that back to credit and signal something more substantive other than like, we just can't work around the system, but what we mean is a unit of proficiency.
Okay. No,
Do you mind if I come in with a follow-up question there, Member Rodriguez?
yeah, I'm done with my question.
Oh, okay, thanks. Just curious, is it not worth noting it as a parenthetical or a footnote? Because as it is so confusing and it's a known issue, it seems worth being explicit about it, but not changing it. Leave the UP there. Does that make sense?
What if I put AKA credit? So it says 21 units of proficiency in parentheses ups, comma, AKA credit. I don't know.
Is there any other instance where we would refer to it as a credit?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people still use the credit language because it's in IC. It's what people are used to. Or I could just say in parentheses, ups dash credit.
I think the thing that sounded important to me was to note that it's credit in Infinite Campus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just to minimize the confusion for people, for a better comprehension, because we understand the wording, but he's not giving to everybody. So he's bringing more confusion if we remove the credits from the policy, but we look at the credit from the Infinity Campus. So parents are getting a lot of confusion of that. That makes sense, yeah.
So what if I put, I don't know if you're in the document, but now I put in the parentheses, 21 units of proficiency in parentheses, quote, ups as described as, quote, credit in Infinite Campus.
Yeah.
Is that, okay. All right. So I made that adjustment.
Roberto, did you say you were good on questions? No, otherwise, okay. Yeah. I don't have any further questions. That was my only one as well.
Okay.
So it looks like we have one attendee here. Is there any public comment on the motion? You have to raise your hand if you're an attendee, if you'd like to speak, so we would know. Okay. I'll move on to any board comment on the motion to move this policy IKF to the full board. So I'll just say I got a master's in education in 2010, and I earned it through a proficiency based program, and learned to do it. Learn to be a teacher using a standard-based system. So it's just exciting to me to kind of come in now at the board when this is concluding. I wasn't here earlier, but I'm happy to see that this is where we are, and appreciate all the work that got us here. It's not my work, but applause and kudos to everybody that got this done. So thanks. So by roll call vote. Please indicate if you approve policy IKF to be forwarded to the full board. Member Bondo?
Yes.
Yes. Member Rodriguez?
Yes.
Yes, and I'm affirmative as well. It's unanimous.
Awesome. And we're right on time. Thank you, committee. Excellent. So next we are going to move into a discussion of the equity policy. This is a brand new policy. We've never had an equity policy as a district. And so our goal for tonight is to reground you all in the process that led us to the product we're going to look at this evening, and for you to really look through it carefully to see if you want to make any changes. And then, ideally we get to the point of getting to a vote to send it to the full board for their consideration. I'm going to share my screen, and Barrett, Mickey, and I just have a brief little bit of framing context. This is just really about regrounding, but we'll spend most of it in the nitty gritty.
Okay.
And so Barrett, Nikki, we can just all do this kind of informally together. Barrett pulled this together for us, but do you want to do this piece, Barrett, or do you want me to?
Sure. Just thought we would share the names of who has been on the equity policy work group. So as you know, because we kind of crafted this plan collaboratively with this group first, we set about creating a policy work group that included staff, parents, and students. And so obviously student engagement is very challenging this year, but we have had a couple of young people who have consistently engaged with the process. And then, staff who hold different types of roles in our system as well, as two parents who have stayed connected. We've also brought this to other groups that are related, but and so these are some of the key stakeholder engagements that have happened. So some of these were involved in more of the brainstorming phase, when we were, before we had crafted anything, like getting ideas and input around like, okay, well, there's a lot of agreement that an equity policy is the right step, but what does that mean? Like, what do you think it means? And what comes up? And, we had some great questions we posed to those groups. And then as we had drafts, we would bring those, particulars to these different stakeholder groups. Most recently, we did a series of kind of open staff and staff feedback sessions. We did a couple of those, and there wasn't a ton of people who attended, but the feedback was excellent. And the people who participated weren't necessarily folks that had been, they weren't equity leaders necessarily, or, hadn't been connected to the work. And so it was really good to have kind of fresh eyes on it to see how it resonated for folks. We also ran a student equity policy work group. So students came to the full policy work group, but we also ran additional sessions with them in collaboration with Mutaha Muhammad at Portland Empowered. She and I co-facilitated those to just have additional opportunities for students to understand the policy, to provide feedback, to have their voice be heard. And, so that's kind of the quick summary on how we've had people engage throughout this school year, really. And this is just kind of a reminder of like how long we've been talking about this. So I looked back in my calendar, and it was right before the pandemic started was the first time we talked about this, with a slightly different iteration of the curriculum committee. But we obviously pushed pause on this until the fall, and then have kind of chugged along. I think initially we thought like, oh, we'll start meeting in September. We'll have a draft by January, which would have been something if we were able to pull that off. But I actually think that taking more time really has contributed to a better result. Also, during this time, we've had, some pretty key moments influence a lot of us in the system around, through this whole timeline, around why this matters, what should be in it, and to build towards a more robust process. So, no process is perfect. And I know that, once we press print on this policy or whatever, that we'll immediately have things that we want to adjust about it. But I do feel like for what the complexity of the last year has brought, this has come quite a ways.
Awesome. Thank you, Barrett. Nikki, did you want to say anything else just about our process before I start to step us through where we've landed?
Yes, I just had a few to emphasize is that the thing is that the way different stakeholders were engaged. I mean, it was amazing with the lens of equity. How you can see then they were moving to the change. But, just bringing all different feedback, it was really exciting to see our different level, I mean, administrator, teachers, staff, and students. I mean, they really want some of the feedback to be reflected in the policy, so we can incorporate, everybody's voices. And then some of them, they just don't want anything to be cut. They want everything to be there so they can be held accountable for all different policies. So we brought really the policy to the lens of equity and be able to hold all policy accountable and building some implementation for the future. So it was so exciting moment. And I'm so grateful to be part of the amazing team and those stakeholders who've been engaged and be there, spending time on Zoom, just sharing those values. And we do respect, and we just want to make it happen in our Portland Public School. Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, Mickey. And I would just say, I got to stop sharing for a second to get out of my presentation because I don't know what I'm doing. That I agree with just your last comment, Mickey. The stakeholder engagement was awesome. Students in particular, like always, they cut right to it and give really clear, super compelling feedback. And I'm going to bring up the policy in a moment, but one of the things that, Barrett, Mickey, and I talked about that kept coming up throughout, and I think you mentioned this too, Barrett, is a strong desire to know that we're going to follow through. And so I think the policy speaks to compliance and accountability, but I think also the policy sets the conditions for the board and the superintendent and all of us to really then manage the implementation. So the policy itself can't describe all the implementation steps. It can't do the accountability itself, but it does give us a little bit of the teeth, if you will, to sort of have something that's not just our beliefs and our values, but it's actually our policy that we need to operate in alignment with what's articulated here. So I'm excited about that. And in my perspective, that's accountability in and of itself that we're putting it in policy form. So I thought what I would do let me check in if this works for y'all, but it's big. And so what I thought we'd do tonight is I'm going to take it section by section and just give you a minute to read where it's at right now, just talk about anything that you have questions about. So this would be, I guess, Adam, from a process perspective, more workshop-y. And then at the end, we can do the motion thing. Is that okay? All right. So that we're good on that. I just think that will be more efficient than being all over the place and having you guys try to digest it all together. Okay. So I am going to bring, oh boy, checking for updates. Can you guys see my screen? Can you see my things at the bottom? Barrett, where did my Chrome go?
You unshared. So if you click on Chrome and then press escape, it's probably because you unshared instead of reducing your screen.
Thanks, Barrett.
I know because I've done it approximately 7,000 times in the last 18 months.
Okay, now am I back?
All set.
Thank you. Okay. So the first section, so I'll do a little voiceover of just pointing you all to if there's anything that's changed, and then you can take a minute to read, and then we'll do questions and any feedback. So the first section that we'll look at is purpose and scope. And so we're going to stop at definitions. So purpose and scope really has largely stayed the same from a substantive perspective since we last looked at this. There are some minor editing issues. I think the two things I would point out is that here in the second paragraph, where we're taking an acknowledgement of the district's role in perpetuating the system that's resulted in disparities, we name disparities in access to grade level curriculum, advanced classes, et cetera. So before we just led with advanced classes, we added grade level curriculum. And that's speaking to sort of this indication of how we track students and how some students are pulled out and get lower level skills-based instruction. So trying to have recognition of that as well. And then the other sort of semi-substantive thing is, oh no, it's down in definitions, what I was going to say. So I'm going to pause myself. So take a minute. You all should have access to this through board docs, and I emailed it, but also if you want to skim and then just let me know if there's any questions or discussion you want to have about the purpose and framing section. And maybe what we can do is just like, since there's just a few people, just say when you're ready, and then that way I know how to know where folks are at. You guys still reading? No, good. Okay. So any questions or feedback on this section? And I'm doing workshop style, so not waiting on you, Adam, to sort of facilitate that piece. That's okay. I think we're okay. Thought you'd say it was okay.
Good.
Okay.
I think it's a strong start. It says lots of things that I like, and that sets us up well. That's my comment.
Okay. Great. Anything from you, Roberto? Okay, great. So let's go to definitions. So definitions, couple things to call out here. I think feedback from this group last time wanted us to be even more explicit about how equity is not equality. So there's this sentence here: equality is antithetical to the definition for equity that is held in PPS, and a precise understanding of equity in the related terms is essential to understanding the intent of the policy. So just that is something that got added somewhere along the way based on feedback. I think there's a little bit of streamlining in the definitions. Yeah, I think the last version we looked at there's still more language, I would say. And so we were doing some more kind of just like editing and streamlining. And then Barrett, anything else that's substantive here to name?
I don't think so. I'm trying to remember where this was at the last time you saw it, but I don't think we've actually changed the definitions we've pulled in here. I think it's pretty close.
Yeah. Okay. So then I'll give you all just a minute to kind of read it again, and then we'll same thing, see if there's any questions or feedback. Y'all want a little more time?
I have just a quick question. Not the definitions all look. By the way, I'm sorry. These were all taken from the groups, right? So what I was going to ask was, we wanted to connect the PBIS work to the policy. Are these definitions also connected to the PBIS, the way that we do the PBIS framework? We talked a little bit about that, I think, somewhere else on our last meeting.
I think that where the PBIS connection may fit in is a new section we added called environment, and it's about culture, climate, and school environment. So I feel like they're in, and I think you'll probably have feedback on that section actually, but that's where I remember the conversation as well, and others have brought up just looking for alignment, but I'm not sure that we saw a place where that would come into the sort of general definitions here. I mean, you might have a way of doing that, but in terms of where we got in our thinking.
My one question is there any discussion of including redress in these definitions? It's just an uncommon word, and since we use it explicitly, it's not familiar for most folks. That's why I ask.
Oh, like adding like redress?
Yes.
Oh, I don't think there was discussion about that, but I'm hearing that also as maybe a possible point of feedback.
Right. I asked it as if was it discussed, acknowledging there's conversations that have been had that got you to this point. So I didn't want to.
Yeah. No, we didn't talk about adding that as a definition yet.
Okay. So then, yes, point of feedback would be perhaps include it just because it's a not familiar word. And it's a key point of what the point of this policy is trying to do. Right. So.
If others are comfortable, I can do that here. Yeah, we could work on that, and then if we can keep going. But if anybody has a solid working definition, even Barrett, if you look at that while we're hearing other feedback, that would be great.
And my other point of feedback, I appreciate the updated what equity looks like when it's achieved. I think this is an improvement over what we saw last time, and acknowledging last time it was kind of a placeholder. So glad to see where it is now.
Great. Okay, any other feedback? Thank you for that.
Yeah, the feedback, and I think today equity lens is the way we've been asking some quick questions, the key questions, so people can start thinking or reflecting exactly, instead just to have a narrative phrase, sentence all through to the end. So that means those questions really re-questioning people to reflect and then asking questions several times to who you really serve, who beneficial of that. So I like that aspect, so people can really keep on digging on that and look at to the equity lens. That's really the good aspect when I see then that questioning right there. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, well then if there's no other feedback here, maybe Barrett, you could do a little bit of quick Gorski Googling, see if he has a fantastic redress definition, and we can come back and look at that before we sort of go into the more formal process. But that's great. So let's move into the policy expectations. So just as a reminder, there are several sections. So we have a staff and capacity building section, a curriculum and instruction section, a school environment section, and then implementation strategies section. And so we'll take each section one by one, starting with staff capacity building, staff and capacity building. The first, so just again, calling out some updates since we last had a conversation. In professional development, there was a lot of conversation that came out about making sure people do the PD. And this from students and from parents, like there was like a lot of interest in like, how are you going to make sure people do it? So once again, to my previous comment, I'm not sure the policy can be like the person holding people accountable, but what this asserts is that there are some required trainings that all people take part in. And so it's giving the language that then we use to then make our implementation strategy to ensure accountability. So I would say that's one thing to just say out loud. I think the other thing is that this little piece here, students very much wanted to make sure that all staff were oriented to the policy as well as all students understood. So they were like, wow, it'd be great if we knew that this was a policy and this was an expectation. So lots of super great feedback about wanting, like, overwhelming feedback from students that they wanted to make sure students were aware of this policy, and then really good practical suggestions for kind of one-pager versions that are more accessible than this policy. So that would be, just as a side note, a plan that we'll have when it gets to rollout, both internally with educators, but also with family and students. But this is just named here so that, you know, the policy indicates that we're going to have to take steps to make sure everybody's oriented. The other thing I just wanted to say here in staff evaluation is that there's an expectation that evaluation tools and processes incorporate opportunities for reflection and feedback on this use of an equity lens and kind of impact on gaps and inequities. So that's work we're already moving on, at least so far, with our teacher eval system, but sort of, again, putting this into policy as a broad expectation for staff. And then I think the rest of this is just some refined language to concepts that were in there previously. So the section's more fleshed out, but like a lot of the same ideas are in here. So I'll give you another minute on this one. Just gonna make sure you're clear, and then we'll just talk about any questions or feedback. Okay, more time. Are you good?
I have a quick question.
Yep.
On the discussion about making sure that there's participation around the professional development, what do we know what other districts do to promote that, or to, like, what are strategies that we know of that are effective in that regard? Maybe not necessarily around equity based, but just in general. I mean, professional development is always the way that we advance any kind of change, whether it be curriculum based or anything. So what are the strategies to make sure that you have good participation and carryover of professional development as a strategy in the district?
Well, I mean, I think the very best practices have to do with the type of professional learning culture you build and the degree to which you have a culture where people like understand and buy into the expectations and vision. But then there's also sort of moves you can make that are more compliance oriented around taking attendance. And then if you notice that, you know, the same people aren't going to particular types of PD, or even if people miss key PD, that there's an actual follow-up conversation to sort of check in and to like figure out how that person's going to be able to make that up and still get that information. So I think there's a ton of things I would say as it pertains to sort of just good management and leadership. But, you know, at one point we had put into the policy language itself that there would be a requirement of taking attendance. And I think that's, in my opinion, getting sort of down into the weeds of like only a singular super compliance oriented strategy for ensuring people are there. And there's a whole set of things, you know, that you can do to make sure people are buying into your professional development vision as it pertains to your school priorities, and then actually attending and following through on it. The other thing I would just say is that we're working on, we call it professional learning system. That's essentially like really working with school leaders on their plans for once they have their school success plans that have very clear annual priorities. How are your strategies for supporting professional learning and growth in alignment with those priorities? And how do you kind of plan and map that out so that there is sort of adherence to adult learning culture, right? Where it's not just like one and done episodic PDs, but like like ongoing embedded professional learning that includes new knowledge building, but then also checking in on reflection and application. So it's a big question, but I mean, I could talk for a long time about it, but I think there's compliance things, but there's also just culture and having a team that's bought into what you're trying to do.
Muted.
And I appreciate that. And I know that there's a lot of other layers. And as you know, I've been part of some of the contract negotiations where professional development has been discussed from different angles. So I'm aware of many challenges that we have, and that there's only so much time during the day to do professional development, and we still have students that we need to educate. So it is complicated, and I did want us to just talk a little bit about how that's the culture that we have in our district around professional development. So board members consider that as well. Thank you, though.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add something on that? And I just want us to reflect what the student has mentioned on the feedback. It's really important to understand. I think maybe that one, maybe it's going to be down to the evaluation. I mean, how well the school is doing those PD, because, the thing they just don't want to see happening is that one school is doing better and the other school is not doing nothing. So are we holding the schools accountable, the leaders of the school accountable, to make sure that those PD are really reflecting what the policy is being mentioned here? And I think that was really the concern of on the student, because I don't want us to lose the aspect of the student feedback. And that's going to be for the A, and what's going to be for the A1, when they really talk about, the way most of our policy have been so complex for them to understand, complexity of the language, complexity on the implementation. So are we making the equity policy simple for most of the students? So I don't know if that language will be reflected in the implementation, or we can, because I just don't get it clearly, was the part of the district professional development must include an orientation to this policy for all staff as well for students. So I mean, which part of the student? I mean, orientation, we have to do orientation as well for the student to understand the policy, or what's going to happen exactly here for the student specifically?
I mean, I think that, again, in this sort of policy context, it's just saying there's an expectation that we're doing an orientation to the policy. So what I would imagine that actually looks like is we're going to make these really accessible kind of 1 and 2 pagers. I imagine that we'll work with student leaders to think about ways that it can get rolled out. Like, what are the structures? What are the sort of strategies? I think we'd have to work with our school leaders around sort of where and how does this get integrated? How does time get carved out for it? But I think at the policy level, it's just saying that our expectation is that students are aware of and oriented to the substance of what this is about.
Okay. All right.
And then I think to your other point, Mickey, I know it's come up a lot with people, but I do think when we look down at compliance, which is essentially the accountability section, it's not like a full implementation plan of how you would hold people accountable, but it does indicate the kinds of expectations we have for ensuring follow through on this stuff. So I think down there, I'm sure folks will want to look at that carefully in that section.
All right. Thank you, Maria.
Mm-hmm.
I have a challenge for you. Can you roll this out to students through a TikTok? Can you get a boom, 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 boom?
I've always wanted to do one of those where you point and
yeah.
Can you lead that, Adam?
No, that was my challenge to you. But yeah, I'll play on that with you. Yeah. I'd play. My question is about B. Curious, and again, I'll frame it as like, have you had conversation, and to take it as like question as well as feedback ultimately. But like, obviously, this is work that we need to be committed to, and it's ongoing. And so the move to focus on incorporating reflection and feedback during evaluation makes sense. And then I'm curious from 2 different sides: is is there a matrix of like proficiency about this ultimately? Because on the one hand, folks want to know how they're doing with it, right? Because it's big and it's ambiguous, and like, am I proficient in using an equity lens? And then secondly, because we can't have people who are not proficient in it in front of students. Like, we can't, this is the spirit murdering that Dr. Bettina Love talks about. Like, if you're not doing this work, you shouldn't have the responsibility of teaching students ultimately. And that's my point of view. And I'll say that clearly here. And we've dealt with that through the report that is mentioned in this policy as well. So what's our safeguard to not end up in the past, again, with people not doing this work and not being committed to this work and not developing a competency in what it looks like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that, so for example, we had a group of teachers who proactively came forward and asked us to adjust our TVAL system to incorporate equity literacy. And so there's been a work group that I'm a part of who's been working on that this year and using the Danielson domains, because that's the tool that we use. So lots of debate about would we take on one domain at a time, et cetera. But what the group chose to do is to take a strand of each of the 4 domains and to begin to incorporate like a equity lens into the evaluation system. And actually, this is where, Roberto, to the PBIS point, there's, one of the domains has to do with culture and classroom management. So that's like, so we're doing that work, but what this in policy say, like this now is formalized in policy, which if we weren't already doing it, we would need to start saying, okay, how, are the tools and processes that we are using embedding this? And so next, we plan to take on administration and other positions. And in that process, as you can imagine, for teacher evaluation systems, they do have rubrics. And the teachers worked really hard to sort of just give descriptive language for what it looks like to be meeting the expectation, exceeding it, and not meeting it as it pertains to those elements. So that's how I imagine it looking. And those just are the first moves we're making. But those would be, for example, if this year we had this policy in place and we were having to report to you all on, okay, for this piece of it, where are we? We would talk about, okay, we took a first step with the TVAL system in these 4 domains, and that would be our accountability to you that we're actively taking steps forward to implement, for example, this particular component.
Cool. Thanks. That's really helpful to hear, and sounds great. Yeah. Yeah, we should talk about that work, side note. So it's been great, teacher-led. Cool.
Okay. There's a lot to get through still. Anything else in this section? Good to go. Okay. I'm going to keep going because I can't totally see all of you. So just interrupt me. Curriculum and instruction. This, I think, has some sort of wordsmithing that took place, but the substance is pretty similar. I think one of the things to name is in letter A, there was also a little bit of dejargoning thanks to the student feedback. They're like, what does asset-based mean in curriculum? There's just good to hear which words don't make any sense if you're not an educator. So the first one, A, I just wanted to call attention to this because it's before it talked about everybody applies language principles. And I think people are like, what does that mean? So this is trying to be just more descriptive about what we mean. And also to say all educators, classroom teachers, content teachers, EL and special ed must integrate practices that make engaging and relevant grade level curriculum accessible to all students, including students learning English and students with disabilities. So the spirit here is that it's not the ELL and special ed's teacher's job to figure out how to make grade level engaging relevant curriculum accessible to a student learning English. It's any teacher's job to do that. And so just being clear about that is sort of part of our curricular expectation. In B, per the students, we changed from asset-based to just this description that we prioritize students' strengths and values and thinking about positioning with them with agency. And then, like I said, the rest is sort of some tweaks and wordsmithing, but the big ideas are the same as before. So, do you guys want a minute to read this again, or?
I'm good.
Okay. How about you, Roberto? You want to read? Okay. So any questions or feedback on this section?
Looks good to me. I'm keyed in on letter B right now. Looking forward when we meet that. And that's reality, not just paper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking forward to A and F. Anything from you, Roberto, on this one?
No, I like it a lot. I mean, I like it a lot. I really appreciate a couple of times so far we've paused to reflect how the student feedback has shaped what we're looking at right now. So it specifically things like you mentioned, like I forgot what you said was
assets based.
Yeah. So this seems. I was gonna ask, was F also influenced by the students? I like their next goal. I don't think that I've seen that before that way. I've always seen like the next, and then there's like this like series of like potential next steps that a student
career and college career.
I like the word goal. I wonder where that came from.
Well, sadly, it's uninspiring. It was me. But it was to your point, it was sort of not through this process only, but that idea that this is not just about like these lofty college career and life, but like, you know, in fifth grade, right? Like, how are we holding kids to holding kids to high expectations and helping them get there so that they can make it to the next thing they're trying to do. And again, that idea of like student agency, their next goal versus asserting assumptions about what people are wanting to strive for.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it stood out to me at least. So I like it. Way to go, Malia.
Thanks. Sweet. And Mickey, I've been sort of popping back from Adam and Roberto, only knowing we've obviously worked so hard on this, but not meaning to not. Yeah. And I know you'll jump in if you.
Yes, I will. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else from the three of you on this section before I advance?
I just want to give you snaps too. You can get snaps. Good job.
Sweet. Okay. I'm just going for my next boom, Roberto. Okay. So the next one might will be quick to review, but may require some feedback. So this is a late breaking edition. Actually, even since Barrett, Mickey, and I met to review all the feedback, then I went and did some updating, and then we haven't come back and talked about this section. So just full transparency there. But there was feedback from you all, and that came out around the sort of what we're putting in this category of school environment, which has to do with both the physical space and the climate and the culture. So that is where I was making the connection, Roberto, to the PBIS. And we were trying not to go deep here because we already have a slew of policies connected to, kind of some of the climate and culture things. So that was our trick, is like, not to sort of spiral into what sometimes we were tempted to do in this policy, which was to like repeat ideas in all the other policies. But we wanted some acknowledgement of the school environment sort of theme, because, we have curriculum and instruction and we have the, people stuff, but we didn't speak to that kind of big idea, and it felt missing. So you can take 2 seconds to read this, but definitely would be interested if people feel like this needs more flesh. Like, I don't want to add words to add words, because everybody said wherever we can streamline, please do it. But if you feel like there's like certain key ideas that we want to have added to this, would be definitely curious for feedback on this one.
I hear the tensions that you're holding here, and my question is only, did the students have any feedback on this?
I think, I mean, I don't know, Barrett or Mickey, and I was one of the people that reviewed all the student feedback. I feel like they more spoke to things that started to get into other policies that are cross-referenced at the bottom, like some of what's come up with like student discipline policies and they're related. And so we did, by the way, make sure to cross-reference those in this policy at the bottom.
I think this actually, it came more recently from some of the staff feedback where it felt like there was some questions about like, well, how does this help us do better for people who have physical disability or students who are with us, but from Baxter School for the Deaf? Like, how do we really improve the actual environments of our schools? Like, one of the examples someone said is like, in our really old school building, I think there's one elevator that students could use. Like, how do we get at that? Like, I had a conversation with a staff member from Baxter earlier in the year that came up for me when I was thinking about this. That was like, you know, there's alarm systems that are accessible for people who, you know, like don't hear sound. And so how could we improve our school buildings to better have that? And so it felt like, you know, that there's always more to be done around those things. And so could this policy help name that and work towards those elements? And then, you know, the climate and culture piece is just like, you know, there's so many equity themes there, but it felt like, you know, so when we talked yesterday, Mickey, Malia and I, when we were like kind of going through the final feedback, these two things felt like they were school environment related, but like we hadn't yet created this section. So that's kind of where, in my mind, that's where it most recently kind of came up in discussion.
That's exactly why we come out, because we didn't know exactly where to put that to be aligning with other paragraphs. So I think it was a special place then, you know, can be described. The thing, and I think, I don't know if I get that feedback, it's not the student who been mentioned about the climate in the school. I don't know if it's that the same setting. It's like, okay, when we talk about the student pictures, the picture day or something, it was not relevant to this, or is it something else? I just want to make sure. It was not part of the school culture.
I think the picture day thing came up in the context of accessibility. And I do remember, Mickey, we were like, where does that fit? But that thing came down in a minute into resource allocation.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I just want to make sure. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. We have another member of the committee.
Mm-hmm.
Lynn. Youth voice everywhere. So so what do y'all think? I mean, is there anything you feel we should change or add?
I was worried that if we kept kind of digging in there, that could go so many different directions. So just kind of open up this, because even I started thinking in the climate and culture. I started to reflect on some of the discussions that we've had in the PBIS work groups at Lyman Moore about shared spaces and how even that then, how we share classroom, materials, and then of course spaces, and how we have to be respectful of how we treat things, right? Like anyways, so even how it applies in the classroom. So I was wondering, like, are we worried that does take us down a path where we try to then over-define what physical spaces, because I know this is meant more on the accessibility side of it, but there's also a shared space point of view here that I was automatically thinking about. So again, just caution, are we worried that that opens us up to too broad of or too many layers to peel?
Well, I think that's interesting. I had actually thought the physical space was broader than just physical ability in terms of the pieces I was connecting to that in this big idea of safe and welcoming environment broadly. But do you mean that like anybody could say, well, we need to do this as justified by the policy and it's, or did you mean like if we start to try to define this further right now in the policy, it becomes this big gigantic section?
Yeah, I think that last part, yeah, that becomes like a a big gigantic section. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we were also just really aware that the climate culture piece really does live in other policies. You know, in the harassment discrimination policy, in bullying, you know, and so I was just sort of like, how do we not be repetitive, but also tie it to an issue of equity when those things are not met?
Right.
My question that's different than what we've spoken about so far is just wondering, does it need any, I don't know what I want to call it a qualifier, but I don't know that that's the right word. Like, especially for those that, you know, are marginalized and disenfranchised or something. Does there need to be any weighting of the scale to be explicit of who this is usually not done and designed for?
Mm-hmm. I wonder if I'm going to try something. I can't do this right now, actually, this way. I was going to try to give a header to it because it pertains to both. But we could just add especially, or
yeah, I think a header that frames it in the context of equity, like all the other sections do, is probably what we're missing to help ground this piece. And so maybe it actually is B. I don't know, but or some of the language there, but I think that is probably what would help us tie this together.
Yeah. If we work on that for a minute, I would say let's keep going through the other substance and we can decide if we want to try to get the wordsmithing now or if you all will feel comfortable enough to say we'll do that offline before first read. And, you know, is that okay? All right. Okay.
Good.
So cool. Okay. So let's move into implementation strategies. Let's just kind of hit these one by one. So utilizing land acknowledgements. This is largely the same. Bridget Neptune, who's parent in the district, but also one of the people that has been doing consulting with us on our Wabanaki studies work, and is Passamaquoddy, right, Barrett? Is that correct? I just want to make sure. Is Bridget Passamaquoddy?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. She actually originally, she's on the work group, was the person who suggested we integrate land acknowledgements into the policy itself, and then gave us feedback around both the substance of the example one we have here, as well as some of the framing to it. And Fiona Hopper as well, our Wabanaki Studies Coordinator, helps shape this one. Students did give feedback on wanting to acknowledge the connection between this and the broader curriculum work that's underway. So you'll see that's in the framing here, and that does come directly from some student feedback as well as staff.
Mm-hmm.
So any questions, discussion, feedback on this one?
I'm glad to see it. I'm glad that it names, you know, why we do them.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good reminder. I like it.
Okay,
So let's name that. Yes.
great. Okay, anything from you, Roberto? I think, wait, you're talking.
Yeah, no, I was just saying I like it also, and it's really special that we included that in there. So,
Okay, great. So next, the fun one, resource allocation. So this did kind of evolve some since our conversation. And so just a couple things here. This first bullet, and Mickey and Barrett, I actually did some edits on this one from our conversation. So this is trying to speak more directly to the fact that the annual budget is developed and evaluated from the perspective of how it aligns to advancing equity. So you can read the language there. And then the second piece connects to what you were asking about, Mickey, where did it end up, which is that school picture example, that any school-based activity or opportunity needs to be made available for all students and shouldn't require a financial burden beyond what they can afford. Just noting, we also talked about not putting an additional burden on families to prove a level of need. But this morning in cabinet, we tuned this, and Javier did point out that we have to have this caveat of participating where required by, state and federal law. So sometimes we have to know, the FRL status in order to get the funds to make it accessible. So just, and by the way, he said, we'll run this by lawyers. They might have something to say about this just to make sure we're not, we're good on that. But anyway, enough of me talking. Take a second to look at any questions or thoughts on this.
This is good by me.
Okay.
good.
Cool.
Good.
Yep.
Okay. Next is engagement and collaboration. So this is about engaging community in all aspects of the policy, and this sort of broad definition of community of students, staff, caregivers, and community organizations. And so we're sort of asserting this expectation of sort of multiple methods for feedback and engagement. So here again, you see this emphasis on student voice, again, coming from our students. There's systems and structures are in place to uplift and amplify student voice. We did talk, by the way, Barrett, this morning from Art and Mickey about the language translation. Yes. So with Grace, we cross-referenced the translation policies. The original way it was written made Javier and Grace worried about, just from an implementation perspective, we were not in a position to live up to the full expectation. And we already have policies about translation. So it was just a little softening of that in the cross-referencing here. And I think the rest was kind of in there before. So questions, feedback, processing.
Again, looks good to me.
Okay. Okay. Great. Good to go, Mickey?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Data utilization. The framing piece is the same, I think, as what you all saw before. There are some places, I don't know, Adam, you see here the role of data utilization is to respond to and redress disparity. So there are multiple places where we've tried to carry through that particular framing language per your feedback. So just pointing that out is an example right here. And so this is the place too where the policy language itself can't carry all the way into implementation management, right? It just sets forth the expectation, and then we actually all have to hold ourselves accountable to it. But it speaks to the goal setting component, the ongoing data-based reflection on looking explicitly at gaps and disparities. Here you see that the ensuring data collected gives insight into the progress as it pertains to redressing inequities. Here's another piece of student voice. So we actually talked about this in cabinet today. So ensuring there's both qualitative and quantitative measures, and then saying part of the qualitative data collected should illuminate the student experience in their classes and all school-related experiences, and should be collected in such a way as to ensure students feel safe sharing their true experiences and feedback. So again, it doesn't start to get into like, that will mean that we're going to take class surveys yet. Like how we go about that and the way that that evolves and grows will sort of evolve and grow over time, but it asserts that makes that broad assertion. And then equity audits were in there before. So processing questions and feedback.
I just have come out to my mind. I think it was from the administrators' feedback when they mentioned about, now they have, the system, the Portland Public School look like, they have data all over the place. So that means it's so difficult, to have, how can we bring to center those data so it's more accessible to everybody. So I think they really mentioned, and I know he was with Dr. Ahmed, he was really worried about, sometimes you cannot get those specific data when you're looking for. So that means how we center those data so it's more accessible for each level of the district administration. I don't know if we can be reflect here, because I see we have all the setting, collection, everything, but it's not like how we center that. I think most of the administrators, they're really looking for it because sometimes it's so difficult to find the right data where they are.
I mean, what I would personally say is we have woefully underdeveloped data systems and dashboards. And I also would say I feel very confident for the first time that we're on a path to actually have data dashboards that give us access to ongoing meaningful information that does those things we're looking for, Mickey, in terms of disaggregation and the measures that are tied to our goals. So I think our problem has been that we have not had the data systems and just skill set to fully build that out. And I think we are growing that now. I don't know about policy though. Like, I don't know where you're thinking. I totally hear what you're saying and what you're reflecting from administrators. I guess and maybe I'm too close to it, but I see it as like gaps in our implementation.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you all as the board would pull up this policy, right, and say to the superintendent who you manage, this is really important. Like, how are you giving us, how are you engaging in ongoing database reflection on achievement, discipline, engagement, et cetera? And he would tell you today how it is. And I expect a year from now, you're going to see a lot of growth in that, and this policy gives you some common expectation, all this, right? That this is an expectation that we ultimately have.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, that's how I think about it in policy form, but I don't know if it resonates.
I like number 4 a lot, by the way, and the explanation that you gave us on what feedback looks like. And I like that you winked at the word survey.
This all looks good to me. My one question was their discussion about what periodic means in 5, and if there's a version to being more specific.
Yes, discussion. I think, I don't know about audits, but discussion generally about the frequency with which we would be reporting on things. I know, Mickey, that's a piece of feedback you've had is like, more than annually in some of these things. And I think we hit that in compliance where we talk about at a minimum. I think the thing with equity audits, Adam, and we could, you all might want to change this, but the way we've done them it's not like one sweeping audit per year. It's really more like we took up an equity audit process around discipline because that was something we were getting interested in based on our data, and we wanted to more formally audit discipline disparity. And then we were doing the policy work. And so we took up an equity audit process around policy. So it didn't feel like, now's our time to do equity audits. It's more like this is a sort of process that we can apply across lots of different areas.
Just a few examples to put a point on that is like,
yeah,
one of the librarians is doing a library audit. That's a very specific kind of equity audit. A teacher could do a grading audit. A teacher could do an audit of who they've given a bathroom pass to. There's lots of ways to use that. And so it's to try and not be too prescriptive, but to start to embed that practice more systemically, including the thing, like in addition to very, kind of robust formal audits, which we did with policy, with an outside, agency review, with, and same for discipline, that sort of thing too.
Cool. That's helpful. And I can read the same 3 sentences and understand it differently now. So thank you.
Okay. I might move to compliance and then we'll have a few minutes to pull out from the whole thing and go through some process here. But the last section of implementation is compliance. And this is just where we speak to, at a minimum, there's a requirement that the superintendent or their designee is giving progress updates to the board on this work and to the community. So this is where we say that there must be annual equity-focused goals that are time-bound, that there's annual reporting of disaggregated data related to student outcomes and experiences, and that it's accessible to the public. And that also any new policy that's established or reviewed will be done so with this particular policy as a lens for reviewing it. And that the policy itself will be something we look at and review annually to make sure, A, we're living and like implementing what's intended, and then B, I'm sure that we're going to like do work and find that we want to update and revise this as we go. So I just, at a minimum, is called out here because some people are interested in more frequent, and the board always has, the authority to ask the superintendent to give them updates more frequently than annually, but we're just saying like at least annually there is this expectation.
By me.
Yeah, good.
Okay. Good. Okay. Sweet. And then a bunch of policies cross-referenced, so I won't read them to you. But this is what we've been able to come up with so far through tuning rounds that seem super interconnected. So just, you see those there. And if anybody thinks of others, let me know. So just to summarize, it seems like we've got a redress definition. Barrett.
It kind of made me wonder though, because redress, pulling it out of the equity literacy definition is a little awkward. So it kind of made me think like, should we have the definition of equity literacy and use the abilities of equity literacy to define it, which is recognize, respond, redress.
Oh, I like that.
Cultivate, that sort of thing. Like use the whole definition from the Equity Literacy Institute because it is really foundational to we've been using that very consistently to help ground a lot of the equity work. So I made that and then I was like, I think it's actually equity literacy. And we can specifically make sure redress is part of that.
Yes, indeed.
I like that a lot.
I like it. Thank you, Barrett. You're the best.
Brilliant, Barrett. Okay. So we'll do that. And then we also have the school environment header to make. So I'll, Adam, see if you want to sort of do process to see, whether folks are comfortable with those 2 dangling threads before full board. You can do your thing.
Okay, yeah, so I'd put it this way. Is there a motion to recommend the equity policy to the full board with the 2 friendly amendments, the equity literacy definition and the header and I don't know which section was now, the environment there
sorry.
Those will be complete before the first read before the board.
I moved.
So moved by, and seconded by member Rodriguez, excuse me. So any board questions? I see none. Any public comment on this motion? You'd have to raise your hand to indicate. I see none. Any board comment on the motion? I see none. I'll just say thank you again to everybody whose work is reflected on, those first slides that we looked at today of bringing this forward over the course of over a year since we first talked about it here in this committee in March of 2020, just before the world shut down. I agree with the sentiments that were shared, that the time served us well in development of the policy, and proud to move this forward to the board. So no further comments. By roll, Member Bondo, please indicate if you're in favor of the motion. Member Bondo?
Yes.
Member Rodriguez?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes. So it's unanimous to refer this to the full board with those two friendly amendments.
Yay! This is a big moment.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
As Lynn said, it's been a long time coming. So
Yes.
I feel privileged to have been around to make it something real.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you. And I just want to say, just a shout out to Barrett and Mickey. I think, Mickey, it's been awesome having you as a board member stewarding this work. It's really made a huge difference. You know, I think I love when we can do meaningful, substantive work together between staff and the board. It engages our community in different ways. And Barrett, just your ongoing leadership, your humility, your capacity to sort of listen and synthesize and make lots of different people feel like their voice matters. And then ultimately you can see it through to have it matter in terms of what we do and where we're going is an inspiration and a model for me. So awesome work.
Yeah, likewise, Malia, thanks for continuing to help shepherd this along, and particularly for doing the last round of feedback edits and making this kind of come to the more final place, and to this committee of the board. What an honor to just get to work with you on this, and from the beginning have such robust support to say, like, yes, this is the right direction to move things. This is the right thing to do. Let's do it. It's really awesome. And it's awesome to bring that to the staff work group and to be able to say, like, yeah, they're waiting for us to do diligence, but to absolutely bring this forward. It's really powerful. So I'm excited to report back to them, share with them an email that this is moving forward and the mostly final draft, and onward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Barrett. You can share it at all the other districts in Maine, right in our thing. I think it'll be huge. People keep asking. So we saw there's not a lot of models in our state. So I feel like this is yet another example where we can have a ripple effect in terms of our impact. So sweet.
Nights of history. Budget last night and policy passing forward tonight.
Exactly. Yeah. We are so fortunate to have a great team in our Portland Public School.
Yeah.
And I think you just take, the leadership and to bring everything forward, because our core value is just so amazing. Why we value, all our students to be able to be exposed with different opportunities for them to thrive. And then just both of you bringing your leadership because you care, because you do care. And that just something came from yourself, and it's nothing that you created. It's nothing that you brought on the side. It came really from your heart and bring out. So it's inside to out. So that's why making that masterpiece of equity policy, just, to make the change. And we're leading the state. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we may as well call it a Friday, folks.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. When is this going to be on first read at our next board meeting?
June 1. Yes. Thank you. Sorry for clarifying that. So in order to make it all the way through, we're going to do first read June 1 and workshop. So I will work on, we'll probably add to these slides more and get a few more voices in, and I'll run it by, Barrett and I will run it by Mickey and then pass it out to you too as well, just to make sure you feel good about it.
Great. And then I think we also talked about, like you guys just spoke to, we wanted to do some sort of outreach. This is a big deal. There's a lot of intent behind this. So Grace and her team, the communication team, I'm sure are also going to be all over it. Or at least I would strongly urge us to, within our capacity, to try to do as much as possible to advertise this work.
Yeah. Barrett, maybe we can talk about that as a next step. I think it's a good point. I think this would be a good one to do a parent university around as well. So we can talk about that and potentially have a little bit of thinking by the workshop on some of those implementation moves, but I'm sure folks will have ideas to share with us then too. So
there was a ton of great ideas particularly from the most recent round of stakeholder feedback that was very much about implementation and the student stuff in particular. So I think that that part is going to, continue to evolve really nicely.
Yeah. All right. Great.
I can't call it Friday for you, but I can call for a motion to adjourn. Is there a motion? So moved by Member Rodriguez, a second. Member Mondo. Good night, y'all. Good work. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for taking notes, Lindsay. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye, Lindsay. Good night. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.